All right, welcome AP Psychology, Motivation and Emotion 4.6, 4.7. So overall, what motivates us? I always find this topic very interesting um, in the real world because I'm a teacher and I want to know what motivates students. What motivates me to teach summer school every year? What's motivating me to make this video? What motivates you to study for the AP exam? It's all very relevant. What motivates us? So you know conceptually, it's a very interesting chapter. Um, so there's lots of vocabulary you just need to kind of know. There's nothing hard about this chapter. Let's start with instinct theory. Instinct theory, and they're gonna use animals as examples. That doesn't mean that humans don't have instincts, but instincts are, well, instincts. Motivated by our inborn automated behaviors. For example, salmon swim upstream to mate. Um, Instinct would be to protect your kids. Survival is an instinct. To make babies, to want to make babies, especially when you're in your late 20s. Women have an instinct to make some babies. There's a lot of interesting stuff as far as instincts go that motivate our behavior. Okay. All right. Moving right along. Survival. Okay. Okay. Drive reduction theory. I've I've got I've got a way to teach this that really works for me. I hope it works for you. So here's the deal. You get a pressure. Okay. Like let's say you get hungry or thirsty and you get this pressure, this drive to eat or drink or to go to the bathroom. Your bladder fills up and you get this pressure. And then you relieve that pressure and now you feel better. Anytime you make the sound, ah, that's drive reduction theory. You are motivated to reduce this pressure, this drive to relieve this pressure. Okay, whether now here's a word for you that you can write down in a minute. Homeostasis is a word you need to know. Homeo means same, like homogeneous. Okay, homeostasis, think of it as you want to get back to the same state as you were in before. So let's say you're not hungry, then you get hungry. So to relieve the pressure, you eat some food, and then you're back to homeostasis. You're not hungry anymore. Other examples of homeostasis is your body temperature. If you, on average, 98.6 degrees, but if you go take a hot shower, your body is going to go back to 98.6, back to homeostasis. Okay. All right. That's drive reduction theory. Anytime you go, ah, okay. All right. Moving right along. Arousal theory. Now, arousal theory, um, and it's not just sexual arousal, okay? Arousal theory is like, are you aroused? Like, arousal theory is about, we all want a certain amount of arousal. Some of us naturally are just very relaxed all the time, and some of us are more driven than others. Arousal theory says that we are motivated to seek an optimum level of arousal, just right. Like, for example, do you like summer break? Some of you might, some of you might not like it. You may not admit it to your friends, but some of us just want to stay busy, you know? And there's nothing wrong with resting, but after a month of rest, it's like, come on, let's get busy. Some of us are different as far as that goes, but arousal theory says that we are looking for a certain optimum level of arousal. And it does vary. Some of us are just harder workers than others. Okay. Now, here's a word that is very much related: sensation seeking. Sensation seeking it's a scale of how much novelty, new stuff do you want. Like if you score high on sensation seeking, you're more likely going to go to an amusement park, or jump off a cliff, or drive like an idiot. Young men would generally score high on sensation seeking. As you get older, your score on that drops. So generally 50-year-old men do not drive like idiots like 20-year-old guys, because 50-year-old men would not score as high on sensation seeking. All right, that's all I've got on that. All right, write this down. Okay, so you don't want too much arousal. You don't want too little arousal. That's what this on the bottom would be: stress or anxiety. Low stress, high stress. You don't want it to be too little, because then you wouldn't be able to perform. You don't want it to be too high either, because then it's like stage fright. Performance, ideally in the middle, it's going to be the best. Draw this chart on your notes. I'm going to play you a video.
What's up, All-Stars? Welcome to the School of Ireland. Today, we're going to talk about a term that shows up all the time on the AP Psych test, and that's the Yerkes-Dodson Law. Now, what you need to know is that the Yerkes-Dodson Law examines the relationship between arousal and performance. Now, when I say arousal, what I'm talking about is a state of alertness or excitement that drives a person to learn or perform a task. Physiologically, what happens is your sympathetic nervous system kicks in and your heart starts to beat faster, your palms get sweatier, and your digestion begins to slow down in order to conserve energy. But the most important takeaway for you is that the Yerkes-Dodson Law states that we perform our best at a moderate level of arousal. So what we're looking at here is a continuum that plots out what our performance would look like in overstimulating and understimulating situations. So for example, if you're over here in a highly aroused state, this will lead to a state of panic and therefore a low level of performance. Even at this point, you would have a lot of anxiety and your performance wouldn't be that great. If you were to keep going a bit further up the chart, your performance would get better. However, even here, you would still be experiencing stress because your level of arousal is still high. Over on the left side, you'll see that as your level of arousal decreases, so does your performance. At this stage, you're mildly aware, but you're not super focused on what you're doing. Here, you would be experiencing boredom, and near the bottom, you would be asleep. So as you can see, a moderate level of arousal leads to maximum performance. Let me give you an example. Say you're about to take a big test, or your coach wants you to take the game-winning shot. You obviously don't want to have a high level of arousal because this will cripple your performance. But you also don't want your level of arousal to be too low because you may not be focused enough to do well on the task at hand. If you want to see a perfect real-life example of this, hit pause and watch this epic video about Alex Honnold, who is the world's best free solo climber. In other words, he climbs up 3,000-foot rock walls without using ropes or safety equipment. This relates to the Yerkes-Dodson Law because if Alex's adrenaline kicks in or his level of arousal gets too high, it could cause him to panic and fall off the cliff. On the other hand, if Alex exhibits a low level of arousal, this could cause him to lose focus and possibly make a wrong move, which could also cause him to plummet to his death. So just as the Yerkes-Dodson Law says, if Alex maintains a moderate level of arousal, he will perform his best. And this is the key takeaway for today. That's it, all stars. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.
All right. Yerkes-Dodson Law: not too much stress or anxiety, not too little amount of stress or anxiety. Okay, you want it to be just right. All right, moving right along. All right, do this question. The answer is Yerkes-Dodson Law. Okay. All right, do this. The answer is drive. All right, do this. The answer is D. Okay, drive reduction. All right, do this. The answer is Maria. 16, 17 would have the highest sensation seeking score. All right, I don't like this question, but I don't care. It doesn't really matter what I think. All right, the answer is, okay, so it's not just Yerkes-Dodson law. With difficult tasks, low arousal is good. But with easy tasks, you want higher arousal. Okay, and I didn't teach you that, but there you go. All right, moving right along. All right, do this. The answer is drive. So she was cold and she had a drive to maintain a certain body temperature. It's similar to drive reduction theory. Okay. Which graph correctly depicts the relationship between arousal and performance? All right, the answer is the Yerkes-Dodson law. Okay. All right, let's talk about hunger. Okay. What motivates our eating behavior? I did talk a lot about this in the brain chapter. Hunger does not come from the stomach. It comes from our hypothalamus. There are two hormones that you want to be familiar with, ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin stimulates hunger. Leptin gives you satiety. Satiety, think of the word satisfaction. Satiety is that feeling that I've had enough, I don't need more, I'm good. Okay? And if you listen to that satiety signal, then you can learn to not eat as much. Now, you're young, you don't need to probably worry about your weight, but when you're an adult, you need to listen to that satiety signal. Otherwise, you're going to sit around and eat too much. Okay? So just a reminder. Oh, no, this is not a reminder. I have not taught this, and I don't know if I want to. It's kind of complicated. It turns out that your hypothalamus has two parts to it. Your lateral hypothalamus, I believe lateral means on the side. Lateral hypothalamus, when stimulated, it makes you hungry. But when damaged, you won't be hungry. So think of your lateral hypothalamus as what gives you ghrelin. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's accurate based on what I'm reading here. Now, your ventromedial, I believe ventro means bottom. I mean, I think that's what ventro means. Your ventromedial is what gives you leptin. It gives you satiety. Your ventromedial tells you when you're full. But if you damage your ventromedial, you will never feel full again. Okay? So even if you don't remember this, just remember that the hypothalamus controls your hunger. But I'm going to try. I've only seen like maybe one question ever where it's necessary to know the difference between these two. So I really don't want you to spend too much mental energy. But I came up with a way to remember it. Maybe this will work. I'm late for lunch. I'm hungry. The lateral, you notice I underlined late. The lateral hypothalamus makes you hungry. So if you stimulate the lateral, you get hungry. But if you damage the lateral, you will never be hungry again. All right, don't worry about it too much. Let's just look at the questions that I do have. All right, do this question. The answer is, remember the hypothalamus does control the endocrine system. It controls your glands and your hormones. Moving right along. All right, do that. The answer is B. So the ventromedial is what tells you when you're full. So if you damage the ventromedial, you will never feel full and you will keep eating and eating and eating. All right, do that. Ooh, okay. All right. So this is where you need to know the difference. If you electrically stimulate, it's either A or B. Which one of these will you electrically stimulate and it would lead you to consume more food? Not damage, but stimulated. The answer is B. I'm late for lunch. I'm hungry. Lateral makes you hungry. When you stimulate it, it makes you hungry. All right. Do that. The answer is D. Which I don't like this question because I'm like, well, how did the tumor damage the lateral or the ventromedial? Right? So anyway, moving right along. Okay, so we talked about this a minute ago. Homeostasis. Homeo, same. Stasis, state. So you have certain things that your body wants to keep at a certain state. Your body weight, for example, your body temperature, even happiness. If you are generally a happy person, then after something bad happens to you and you're sad for a couple of weeks, you will probably go back to being as happy as you were before. There is a certain level of happiness that your body wants to maintain. But that's what homeostasis is. And if you change this into an adjective, you'll see the word homeostatic. You'll see that in a second. All right, moving right along. All right, do this. The answer is homeostasis. Moving on. All right, do this. The answer is, boom. Your body wants to maintain a certain weight. Homeostasis. In the real world, we call that the set point. All right, do that. The answer is, okay, so you're thirsty, so you drink water to get back to balance. Homeostasis is like balance. Think of it that way. All right, moving right along. I don't want to talk about that. Okay, there are other psychological aspects to hunger. The Garcia effect, which we learned about in the learning chapter. You could be classically conditioned to be disgusted by a food. The sight of food does make you hungry. So these are some things that are mentioned by the College Board. These are external factors on hunger that are not the hypothalamus. The time of day, circadian rhythms, so you get hungry about the same time every day. Social gatherings, you're probably going to eat because you don't want to be, socially rejected by people that care about you. That's going to make you hungry. And just being around food is going to make you hungry. You may not be hungry until you start, being around it. All right, moving right along. I'm going to go fast on this, not because I don't think it's interesting. It's just I don't think they're going to ask you about it, but it is on the list. What motivates sexual behavior? And in this case, I mean homosexuality. I'm not talking about gender identity. I'm talking about sexual orientation here. We do believe that homosexuality is nature, not nurture. We do not believe that you can raise your kid to be gay. We do believe that it is biological. Now, what kind of biology? Is it genetics or is it hormones or something else? Honestly, we really don't know. But there is some interesting studies, though. There was some studies with 61 pairs of twins where at least one of them was gay. Of the monozygotic twins, that means they're identical. 66% of the pairs were both gay. Now, that's interesting because you have the same exact genetics when you're identical twins, but only 2/3 of you are gay. That means that it's not totally genetic. There's something else going on there. Monozygotic, think of the zygote as one. Mono means one. One zygote splits into two. So twins are really just clones of each other, genetic clones, okay? Dizygotic, that's fraternal twins. That means you're like brothers and sisters. Only 31% shared homosexuality. So basically, since dizygotic twins are 31% both gay, but identical twins, 66, are both gay, that means that it's at least partially genetic, but not totally. Again, I told you, we really don't know. We think it could be prenatal hormones. We've in the lab, we've been able to create lesbian sheep by giving them more testosterone while they're still in the womb. But we think we think prenatal hormones could cause it, but we really just aren't sure what causes homosexuality. Okay. All right. So do this real quick and we'll move on. The answer is there is a slight genetic predisposition. It's not major, but there is some. Okay. All right. Moving right along. Okay. I've never seen the word self-determination theory on the test, but basically that's when you get into what we call intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic is inside. Intrinsic is when you do it for the love of it, okay? Extrinsic is when you do it for the outside rewards, for the money, for the trophies. I'll give better examples on other slides, but intrinsic is inside. You do it for the love. Extrinsic, you're doing it for the money and the trophies. So here's a good example. Why do we feed ducks? Are we getting paid for it? No, we do it for intrinsic motivation. We do it just because we want to. Extrinsic motivation. Take a look at this. But if you're doing it for the money, you're doing it for the trophies, you're doing it for the social pressure, others' approval, that is extrinsic motivation. If you want to just win, that's extrinsic. And it's fine. Do both. There's nothing wrong with wanting to make money. There's nothing wrong with wanting to win. Okay? I teach summer school because I want the money. I also enjoy teaching. So I am extrinsically motivated and I'm intrinsically motivated. Okay? So here's another intrinsic inside, extrinsic outside. Moving right along. Incentive theory. It basically means what it sounds like. We are motivated to do behaviors when there is an incentive. So could I pay you to do your homework? Well, if you pass the AP psychology exam, then you could not have to pay $1,000 on taking Psych 101. So that is an incentive theory. It's not a great one because the payoff is a long time from now. Plus, if you have somebody else paying for college, but that's partially an incentive theory. Incentive theory is definitely an example of extrinsic motivation. Token economy, that's an incentive, okay? This is not on the exam, but studies show that if you get too much extrinsic reward, then you will not have intrinsic rewards. So the theory goes is that if you pay somebody to do something that they already love, then they won't love it as much. Could I pay you to play video games? But what if I paid you too much and then it just became a job? Would you love it as much? Theoretically, no, you wouldn't. And on that topic, did reading logs ruin the joy children's joy for reading. You know, you're saying you got to read, and if you read these books, then we will give you ice cream or pizza or something. What if extrinsically rewarding kids for reading ruined their joy of reading? It's just something worth talking about. All right, do this. The answer is A. Intrinsically motivated people do work harder than extrinsically motivated. All right, do that. The answer is extrinsic. Money is extrinsic. All right, do that. The answer is money is incentive theory. It's also extrinsic. All right, do this. The answer is boom. Moving right along. All right, do that. The answer is boom. All right. This shows up on the test sometimes. It's called Lewin's motivational conflict theory. I've never seen Lewin's motivational conflict theory on the test, but there are 3 motivational conflicts that I have seen on the test on a regular basis up till now. And I'm going to explain all 3 of them to you. So here's the deal. If you've got 2 pleasant options to choose from, we call that approach conflict. So do you want a Toyota or a Honda? Well, they're both good cars. Or you have 2 attractive people who want to date you. That's approach. So when you see the word approach, think good, like good conflict. Here you try to choose between 2 pleasant options. Okay? Do you want this food that you like, or do you want that food that you like? You have to make a decision. That's called approach conflict. All right, moving right along. Then you have approach avoidance conflict. So approach is good, avoidance is bad. You have a good-bad conflict. Approach avoidance conflict is when you have good and bad to both options. Okay? Remember, avoidance is bad, approach is good. So there's good and bad to both options. All right, so where do you want to go to college? Well, this college is cheaper, but it's further away from home. See, there's good and bad. So again, approach is good. Approach avoidance is good, bad. All right, moving right along. And then you have bad, avoidance conflict. This is when you're screwed either way. You have to choose between 2 equally unattractive options. It's kind of like your parent gives you a choice. How do you want to be spanked? And then they say, here's a stick, here's a belt, pick one. That's avoidance. All right, so approach, good. Approach avoidance, good, bad. Avoidance, bad. All right, let's try some questions. All right, do that. The answer is, all right, good, bad. Okay, moving on. Do that. The answer is she liked both activities. That's good. All right. Approach avoidance, good, bad. All right, do that. The answer is boom. Good, bad. All right, moving on. Okay, so now we're going to talk about emotion. This will not take long. All right, in general, and this is a word you need to know, Cognitive means thinking or thoughts. Appraisal is like your label of it being good or bad. Many theories on emotion involve a cognitive appraisal. So you can consciously decide your emotion. For example, is your mom a crazy driver or is she a fun driver? That depends on your cognitive label. It's kind of up to you to make that decision. All right, I'm going to play you a video, and you might have seen this in a different chapter, but I don't care. You can fast forward it.
A high suspension bridge on a windy day is just the place to put Art Aaron's theory to the test, that danger can provoke passion.
We had an attractive young woman stand on this scary bridge, and every time a young man would walk across by himself, she would stop him and say, "Excuse me."
I'm doing an experiment for my psychology class on the effects of exposure to scenic attractions on creative expression. Would you mind filling out this questionnaire for me, please? Here's a pen.
Almost all the men agreed to do it. After all, it was an attractive woman asking a man to do something. They didn't want to admit they were scared.
And then I have a picture for you to look at. And I'd like for you to write a brief dramatic story based on this photograph.
So the man would write the story, and when he was done, she'd say,
Thank you. I appreciate your time. And I would love, I don't have a whole lot of time now, but I'd love to explain the experiment in more detail when I do have more time. So I'm going to give you my number, and then you can feel free to call me. It's at my hotel.
Okay.
So she would write her name and phone number on the edge of her little sheet, tear it off, and hand it to her.
Great.
Well, my name's Linda, so
Okay.
I hope you call me.
Okay, Linda. Thanks.
Thanks.
She stopped 20 men on the scary bridge, and then she stopped another 20 men on another bridge that was a big, heavy, safe bridge, not very scary at all.
I am doing a project for my psychology class on the effects of exposure to scenic
Of the
attractions.
men who met her on the scary bridge,
Please fill out this
many more phoned her that night than the ones who met her on the safe bridge. The other thing we did is we looked at the stories they wrote. Far more romantic and sexual content when they met the woman on the scary bridge
She's embarrassed because her boyfriend wants to marry her.
than when they met the very same woman on the safe bridge.
I think this woman is a little embarrassed about something that's really not that important at all.
Aaron believes that when our heart is pounding in our chest, we unconsciously look for the most attractive explanation. And if an attractive person of the right sex is standing by, then we're happy to assume we've fallen in love.
All right. So the point of this is that the male subjects probably misattributed their arousal as sexual attraction when it was really fear. Their heart was pounding, and their cognitive label said, I must be sexually attracted to this woman. And maybe they were, but the point is that there was a control group, and the guys who met her on the boring safe bridge did not call back on the hotel as much. And what they wrote didn't have as much sexual content. So again, that's a misattribution of arousal. Okay. Theoretically, if you take your date on a roller coaster, they will find you more sexually attractive after the roller coaster than before they ride the roller coaster, because they misattribute the rise in heart rate and dopamine as sexual attraction. All right, let's try some questions. Do this. The answer is cognitive appraisal. Moving on. All right, do that. The answer is, boom, mislabeled the excitement. All right, moving on. Okay. There is something called the facial feedback hypothesis. I've seen it rarely, but it is interesting. If you smile, you will be happier. If you frown, you will be more miserable. Okay, so basically the facial feedback hypothesis says that your facial expressions literally cause your emotions to some extent. All right, so fake it till you make it. All right, it does make a difference. They've done science on this. You know, they force people to smile and then measure their moods. They force people to frown and then measure their moods. It does affect people's emotions. So sometimes it's best to just smile even if you don't feel it, and it will improve your mood most of the time. All right, do this. The answer is boom. If you're in a job where you have to be happy, then you will probably be happier at the end of the day. Maybe not, but probably. All right, so on the topic of emotions, there are universal facial expressions. You could probably identify these facial expressions. Surprise is when the eyebrows go up. Happy, fear, disgust, contempt, sad. And not only are there universal facial expressions, but there are also universal emotions. Even blind children display these facial expressions. Now, what's the difference between emotions and facial expressions? I don't know. I guess you can have the emotion but not express them with your face. But there are universal emotions and facial expressions. Paul Ekman, names are not that important in the class, but I recommend the show Lie to Me if you ever get a chance to watch it. It's usually on Hulu, but it's a crime show. It's a mystery show where they use facial expressions to solve mysteries. It's just like every other show like that. Now, there is something called display rules. You can have emotions all over the world that people will recognize when you ask them, but they will not express those emotions the same. For example, when Americans go to Eastern Europe, they stand out because Americans smile. But Eastern Europeans, they do not smile. Neither do Chinese and Japanese. Now, this girl right here, she grew up in America, so she smiles, but her parents do not. That is a display rule. That is a display rule means that different cultures express emotions differently. You will see that on the test because the test is looking for ways to make it multicultural. Okay. All right, so summary, there are universal facial expressions and there are universal emotions, but the expression of those emotions varies by culture, meaning display rules. Okay, all right, moving right along. All right, do this. The answer is, all right, yeah, so display rules. Okay, all right, do this. The answer is display rules. All right, do this. The answer is universal emotions. All right, do this. Interesting question, but the answer is A. They know this because they have asked people around the world to identify emotions without there being any language. By the way, C, the polygraph is not highly effective. It's moderately effective. The polygraph only measures arousal, heart rate, breathing, stuff like that. But it doesn't say why your heart rate is up. All right, do that. The answer is, boom, universal facial expressions. All right, that's it. Thank you.